My name is Kelly Kim. I'm a senior advisor at Sodali & Co. To look at the trends in shareholder activism, it's helpful to look back at the annual general meeting season, as it accounts for the majority of activity throughout the year. The 2025 AGM season for Korea was highly anticipated even before it arrived for many reasons. Not only because it was the first year following the implementation of the value program and numerous movements and discussions were happening in the market altogether, but also because activism has already surged over the past 4 to 5 years. And this all made many to expect that 2025 would sustain or even accelerate this momentum. In reality, it certainly did. Although the overall number of proposals and cases of activism remained relatively steady compared to the previous year, it's still fair to say that activism in 2025 remained strong and sustained the upward trend that had been building over the past several years. More notably, the nature and priorities of shareholder proposals have evolved in both focus and sophistication. Besides being more active, shareholder requests have become increasingly diverse and targeted, moving beyond calls for higher returns. Investors are now pressing for governance-focused improvements, calling for greater transparency and oversight, stronger board accountability, and enhanced shareholder engagement. Historically, shareholder proposals in Korea emphasize returns and capital efficiency, but in recent years, especially in 2025, they have become more varied and detailed in nature. Shareholders are now nominating independent representatives for board seats, advocating in systematic reforms such as cumulative voting and other measures, basically to strengthen their influence long-term, and calling for improved disclosures on topics like capital allocation and compensation. These trends definitely reflect a clear shift toward more sophisticated and governance-driven activism. One notable and somewhat unexpected development was the rise of minority shareholder influence. Traditionally, retail investors were less visible in Korea's proxy landscape, where activism was largely dominated by institutional investors. But now this dynamic is changing as retail investors are becoming far more organized and increasingly influential. New tools and mechanisms have emerged to support this growing demand. Shareholder activity platforms, along with custodial institutions facilitating delegated voting, now all allow retail investors to coordinate and consolidate voting power far more effectively and at a much lower cost. As a result, retail participation has become more accessible and more influential, adding a new dimension to this year's governance debates. Shareholder activism is no longer confined to the meeting room. While targeted proposals continue to shape discussions during meetings, activism is increasingly taking the form of direct engagement and market pressure outside formal proxy contests. In 2025, these approaches have proven to be increasingly effective as companies responded to shareholder sentiment by taking voluntary actions such as retiring shares and returning capital to investors. Also, companies are increasingly focused on understanding shareholder needs and perspectives through earlier direct engagements. They seek to build relationships with key investors through structured engagement programs and active board participation. This shift highlights that activism is now extending beyond direct contests for control, with both shareholders and companies using strategic dialogue, reputational pressure, and voluntary governance reforms as complementary tactics. Over the past few years, the government has made its top priority to tackle the problem of undervaluation of Korean companies, the perennial issue of Korea discount, by introducing new initiatives and regulations that directly impact corporate behavior and shareholder engagement. As part of this effort, Korea recently amended its Commercial Act, bringing regulatory changes that directly affect corporate practices and shareholder rights. This was a major change for the market, driven by the government's corporate value program initiated back in 2024. Discussions around these amendments have been ongoing for some time, but with delays. After the new president took office in June 2025, the administration accelerated efforts, moving forward with quite a bit of speed. These revisions were adopted in 2 rounds in rapid succession, one in July and again in August this year. To sum up, there were about 6 key amendments altogether. The expansion of directors' duties to require directors to act in the best interest of all shareholders, not just the companies or those of controlling shareholders, and to treat all shareholders fairly when carrying out their duties. The second one would be the adoption of cumulative voting, along with extended application of the 3% rule, increasing the number of candidates to be elected separately from the board. And then the last two are mandatory hybrid meetings and increasing independence requirements, along with updating the term from outside directors to independent directors to highlight their role. Most of these amendments, except the one on directors' duties, come with a 1 to 2 year grace period and are expected to take effect from seasons in 2027 onward, rather than impacting 2026 AGM season directly. There are also ongoing talks about further changes, including a potential rule to mandate the cancellation of treasury shares. And considering how fast things are moving, these measures could be introduced soon, possibly before the next year's season. The overarching goal these amendments share is in promoting greater transparency, improving oversight, and fostering the development of more balanced, independent boards that are functional and responsible, ultimately to gain investor trust and help tackle market undervaluation.